It is the year 1962, and we're at the Gooseberry Theater, Broadway, as Charles introduces us to the beginning of a young fan as we watch them dedicate their life to the craft in hopes to be seen on stage one day. But unfortunately, rejection becomes their reality, and their moment to shine on stage never happens. What's important to note, it's never revealed whose life of disappointment we were watching at the beginning of this episode, besides seeing like the back of their head at points, but it's safe to assume that this was the story of Loretta Durkin, played by the incredible Meryl Streep. Or, knowing this show, it could be someone else's dream that we were watching that was taken from them. We cut to Oliver taking a final audition for his play before lunch. It's Loretta who's trying out for the part of the nanny. Will this be her moment to shine? As Oliver is in awe of her performance and says to her, "Where has she been this whole time?" it appears that her dream role has come true. But how far will she go to hang on to it? During her monologue, she mentions that she would kill without hesitation to protect the kid that she's in charge of, and I think that's a key scene. Now, I know it was a part of the audition and it was part of the screenplay, but I've done this song and dance for 2 seasons now, and I've been pretty accurate about who the murderers have been, and I don't want to leave out that she wasn't on the list of auditions and she was a walk-in, and she also mentions her agent set this up, but we never met that agent in this episode. Now, it's not too early to start our suspect list. We pick back up after the finale of season 2, after Ben's death of the opening night of Death Rattle, as Mabel kicks into action and wonders if he was potentially poisoned, as Charles believed that it could have been natural causes or maybe a rupture thing. Come on, Charles. After Tim and Bunny, death seems to find them at the most inconvenient places, but this time around, it's not a murder in the building yet. Now, Oliver, being Oliver, starts to panic, but immediately tries to spin this and has Howard tell everyone that everything's fine and that their opening night party is still happening. As I suspected in my last breakdown video of season 2, I figured that a lot of this season 3 would cover that time jump from that year that we got from Ben's death as we cut to 4 months ago. Now, we learned that the trio hasn't been together much as Charles and Oliver has been working on the play, as Mabel points out that they've all been extremely busy, but you kind of get the feeling that she really doesn't fit into the trio anymore, especially if there's no murder involved. Now, it's time to go to the table read as we learn the backstory of this play, Death Rattle. Now, it's a story about death in a lighthouse, and the only person in the room during the death is an infant child. I want y'all to remember that line. As we're introduced to the producer of the play, who goes by the name of Donna, and we're also introduced to her son Clifford. And if you all thought that Teddy and Theo's relationship was unhealthy, we see Donna kiss, no correction, we see Donna make out with her son, but it's okay because he's gay. I am really excited to meet these new characters because they are so interesting so far, as Charles lets everyone know that he's just like the rest of the cast, even though his immaculate television career would say otherwise, according to him, of course, as we learn that his rebooted Brazos show is on hiatus, as the star of the play, Ben, finally arrives as we meet him and his manager, who also is his brother by the name of Dickie. As Ben has everyone sign an NDA because he is covering this documentary about his Broadway debut, which is recorded by his cameraman by the name of Robert. Now, it's pretty obvious that yes, Ben is beloved at first, but it seems once you really get to know him and when you work closely with him, he's kind of a prick. And now you can understand why him and Charles had beef at the end of season 2. Telling y'all, I already love the new additions to the cast 10 times more than I did last season because Paul Rudd is undoubtedly right now a scene stealer, as we learn that Ben has moved into the building. He's actually moved into Amy Schumer's place. I have to say, there's definitely something off with the relationship between Ben and his brother, as we saw Ben blamed his brother for making them be late, but also not saying the cameraman's name right, and Ben wants Loretta off the play after she did her little accent thing. So we see that Ben is already making enemies with this cast, as it's also important to point out that Ben's got a sweet tooth for cookies, which I think is something to remember on the night of his death. As we cut back to the night of Ben's death, and Oliver immediately wants to know where Loretta was because we saw that Loretta was someone that he championed for to stay on to this play after she had her bad table read. Things to remember moving forward during this season: Oliver's cursed at the Gooseberry returns. There's a broken elevator and only 7 people can ride on the one that's working. all important things to remember as we watch the rest of the show. Now, at this after party, which is now all of a sudden turned to this unceremonious funeral reception, we see Mabel approaches Oliver with the idea of starting up their podcast again to uncover Ben's killer, as we see Joy arrives to the party to cheer up her boyfriend, Charles. Now, I couldn't help but to notice the intimate relationship between Oliver and Loretta. The whole you go, I go line seems to be key, and I think it's safe to assume that he might have broke his own rule about the cast and crew hooking up during production. Will this be Charles and Jan all over again? But surprise, surprise, did someone fart and magically come back to life as Ben crashes the party? He's alive, mama's back, as he says. He was dead for over an hour or so. They had to pump his stomach, and they said it was something that he ate, maybe poison cookies. But also, can I point this out? I know he's a star. I know the hospital can't keep you against your will, but man, he got out of there so quick, and maybe he was still recovering, but he was told not to leave. But after seeing the deadlight, he had to return to see his cast. As he's talking to the cast and crew, we see Mabel's recording this as he's apologizing for his behavior to the cast and the crew for the last few months, and he wants to do and be better, but he has a special message for two people, one being Loretta, which he knows is a fellow snake, and he knows one when he sees one as he hisses at her. But then he goes over to Charles, who he knew might have been happy that he died, but he hugs Charles and he wants to start over again. The key thing I want to point out here, I wonder who was that person on the phone that called Ben that made him leave and take that call privately. This goes back to the death rattle thing I want to talk about, and that baby being the only one to see the death. Stick with me here. Will it be revealed that Ben has a secret child, and who could have been the one that sees what happens to him next? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comment section, as the Broadway play is back on, but two people don't seem to be happy about that, one being Loretta and the other being Mabel, who is looking for a murder to solve. Now, I want y'all to notice how Loretta is the only other person besides Dickie leaving the party after Ben. As we end with Mabel, whose aunt's unit is finally finished with the renovations, but she's lonely as she invites Charles and Oliver over and lets them know that she has to be out in 4 weeks because her aunt has actually sold the apartment. So the question is, what will she do next? As the broken elevator is now magically fixed, they hop on for old sake as Charles brings up the fact that they couldn't reboot their podcast because Ben didn't die in the building, and all of a sudden, blood starts to come down from the elevator ceiling, and in comes the dead body of Ben yet again. So it's now official. Who killed Ben after coming back to life from the dead? So after this first episode, here's my suspect list so far. So I'm going to go ahead and put Dickie on that list because there seems to be some tension between the two brothers. I'm going to throw Robert on the list. It seems like he doesn't like the fact that he doesn't say his name right. I'm referring to Ben and Robert's relationship. Of course, we can make room for a mysterious character who we haven't met quite yet. Can't discount the cast members that Ben has had some physical relationships with and some other crew members. But right now, after episode 1, my number one suspect has to be Loretta. Now, I could be wrong, but again, based on Charles and Jan's relationship, we might get that again with the relationship between Oliver and Loretta. We also don't know about if that was really her at the beginning of the episode. Could she have taken that person's life and taken on their identity? And also, her and Ben were not the closer friends. There was definitely tension there. So it gives me all the reason to think Loretta's got some skeletons in those closets. So right now, she's my number one. When you're falling, all you can hear is your heart, as it appears that someone pushed Ben to his death, but the true question is, was it a mistake or was it on purpose? 3 months before Ben's death, as he's rehearsing a scene with Oliver and questions the story of Death Rattle, as Oliver promises Ben he's gonna kill it. Now, obviously, hindsight's 2020, pretty poor choice of words there, Oliver, but flash forward to present day as Oliver learns the news that the play is officially being called off by his producers, but they don't have the courage to say it in his face, as Oliver isn't ready to call it quits quite yet. Now, calling it quits was a very big theme for Oliver in this episode, and I'm afraid to admit it, but it might not only hurt him in the future of this show, but I think it might actually get him killed. More on that a little bit later in today's breakdown. Meanwhile, Mabel is watching reruns of her favorite show starring Ben, which was Girl Cop, which had him running around with frosted tips. Man, you gotta miss those early 2000 hairstyles, as we see that she actually took photos of his dead body the night that he died. And suddenly, Ben's character from the show Ghost pays her a visit, and later in this episode, we actually find out why this version of Ben is appearing to her in this form. Now, we know this isn't the first time we've seen her talk to Ghosts, as she did this to Tim back in season 1, as she's expressing her feelings on being lost and not having purpose as she's approaching her 30s. You know, the more I think of Mabel's backstory, it's actually really tragic. She lost her dad at a young age, 2 of her closest friends died, and one of them went to jail, and death just can't seem to break away from her. It'll be really interesting to see how this season handles her character, and I have a feeling that maybe by the end of all this, she might be a detective when it's all said and done. Cut back to Ben the Ghost, giving her words of encouragement and telling her she'll eventually find her way, but also she'll end up figuring out who killed him. The real question is, what's the deeper meaning of these conversations with the dead people that she has in her mind? Does it speak to her feeling closer to death more than feeling alive? Or since being in love with mysteries and murder mysteries like the Hardy Boys when she was a kid, is she just obsessed with murder? Not like in a killer way, but let me know what you all think about, like I said, Mabel's shining/sixth sensibilities and what it can mean for the character moving forward. Now, the trio decides to go to Ben's funeral together, but they all have their own agendas. Mabel's trying to find clues to see who killed Ben. Oliver hopes to speak to the producers and convince them to keep the show going. And Charles just doesn't want to look suspicious because we know he had beef with Ben. As the crew learns that they weren't that close to Ben as they thought, especially Oliver, as they've been placed in the overflow section 3 where all the strangers sit, right below the actual funeral, which is being televised on television. Now, Mabel meets Ben's security guard by the name of Greg, who has his eyes on the crew of the show, Kimber, Ty, and Bobo, as we see that he invites Mabel to look at the files, which he hasn't shown to the cops because he doesn't trust him. As soon as he said that, my can't trust him radar immediately went off. As Oliver attempts to make his way upstairs, Mabel accepts the guard's invite and brings Charles along with her. Now, the guard shows off his shrine of all the things he's collected from Ben's career, and it is revealed shortly after that he is a super obsessive fan, and he eventually knocks out Mabel and Charles. And while all that was going on, we see Oliver talking to Maxine, who's a critic, and he tries to convince her to share a raving review to the producers, but he doesn't have any luck doing so. And again, not having luck, not having to give up is a big theme with him in this episode, as he learns that her review wasn't gonna be a great review. Matter of fact, she says that it was one of his worst things that he's done to date. And speaking of worst things, she goes a step further and says that Ben's performance in the coffin is better than his performance on stage. Whew, she's a pretty tough critic, y'all, but she promises to never share her review. I'm wondering if we're gonna get more of Maxine moving forward. Let me know what you all think about that character in the comments below. Now, we cut back to the scene with Oliver and Ben, who are having a really good heart-to-heart about him being his authentic self and redoing his line about listening to his heart, which was cut perfectly between Oliver having to appear to listen to his own heart, which is having an attack right now. Back with Charles and Mabel, who is handcuffed at this point, as Charles tries to put a positive spin on the situation, which is, hey, at least it didn't take us 8 episodes to find out who the killer was, which I thought was hilarious, but we all know as an audience, that wasn't the killer. It is way too easy for us to get who the killer is this far in the season. Now, Mabel tells Charles why Girl Cop meant so much to her as a kid, because as we learned, when her dad died, her mom didn't get out of bed for months, and Ben's character in the show got her through some really tough times, and her and her mom were actually able to bond over the show. I really love this scene here, and I thought it was a really great character moment for Mabel, followed by Charles telling her his truth, which was he was the one that actually caused trouble between him and Ben. As he goes into details, we learn that during the Brazo days, Charles got Ben fired on his first job when he was 8 years old based on a very poor table read, which stuck with Ben all these years and explains why he was uncomfortable in episode 1 during the rehearsals and table read. So all these years later, Ben kept all this animosity kept inside of him, and he promises Charles that he was going to make this production a living hell for him just to get revenge on him. Quick side note, do we know who Charles was referring to in season 2's finale when he told Ben, stay away from her? Who exactly was her? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments section. I'm thinking it's Mabel, but I might be wrong. Let me know in the comments below. As we learn that Greg the Psycho fan isn't a security guard, to no surprise, but he's actually a chef or a cook at a steak restaurant, which I wouldn't be surprised if we end up learning that he actually worked there because it's Ben's favorite spot to get steak, or maybe there's more personal connections to that actual restaurant. I think that's something we should keep an eye out for, as he's doing all of this because he believed Charles killed Ben, which eliminates him as a suspect. But just as he was ready to torch the confession out of Charles, in comes the police. Now, this is where we meet the new detective by the name of Biswas, who's actually covering for Williams. Now, we wrap up the episode with learning that Oliver did indeed have a heart attack and he needs to reduce his stress. And if this happens again, things might not end well for him, which to me is definitely foreshadowing for the character. As Mabel expresses to Charles why Greg isn't the killer, as the true question is, who handkerchief was Ben holding when he died? As they theorize how Ben could have ended up with it when he was pushed down to the elevator, which, stick with me here, this may be a bit of a stretch, but what if KT might have something to do with this, as it appears that KT works for the hair and makeup, the set design, and the costumes, so she would have access to his handkerchief. Let me know what you all think about that. Now, I don't know how I feel about this exact scene. It made me laugh with and at the scene at the same time, as Mabel, Will, and Charles perform the episode's title to Oliver, which of course was all in his head, as they want him to relax and stop. But Oliver, being Oliver, takes this moment and does the complete opposite of this hallucination, as he calls Donna with a new idea for Death Rattle as a musical. Death Razzle Dazzle. Has a little ring to it, I can't lie. But Oliver shares the news with Charles and Mabel, as they tell him that the killer is most likely involved in the show and they are officially back to doing the podcast. But Oliver doesn't take this opportunity to tell them his recent health scare. Wrap things up and give you guys my updated suspect list. I still have Loretta as number 1, even though she wasn't in this episode. I'm going to go ahead and add KT to the mix with everything I said a little bit earlier. But here's another new set of characters that had me thinking, what about the producers Donna and her son Clifton? What if they had been killed? Now follow with me here. Last episode, I compared them to like the new version of Theo and Teddy, but think about this. What if they're having money issues very similar to them, and they agreed to fund this project only for them to want it to end, to maybe get some type of huge insurance claim because their lead star was killed? It might be a bit of a stretch, but that's kind of where my head's at with those two characters right now.
Where does a great idea come from? Well, it starts with a single spark. Something small but bright, maybe something only visible to one person. As Oliver boards Howard and Jonathan to sleep as he prepares songs for his producers who are on their way soon, question for you all. Is Moses Morris a name we should remember? You know, Howard's cousin who runs the sponsorships for State Farm Insurance? As Oliver has confidence and overlooks his killer cast to pull off this amazing musical, meanwhile, Charles and Mabel look at the cast as potential killers in Ben's death. Which, by the way, I want you all to remember the number 3 in today's breakdown. He's got triplets this time around for his Death Rattle Dazzle musical, but Donna, all she sees is zeros, as she suggests Oliver needs a showstopper song that will have people becoming addicts just to see this play. Now Oliver, he only has 3 days to make this happen. Meanwhile, Charles and Mabel are thinking what I was thinking after episode 1, which was someone failed in killing Ben at first, but came back to finish the job by pushing him to his death. But the question is, who, as they go one by one of the cast. Now I want to mention this because Charles kind of brushed it off, but he suggested that maybe someone poisoned Ben and maybe it dissipated shortly after, and Mabel knew exactly what he was talking about. Again, if you all remember our episode 1 breakdown, I had my theories of Mabel maybe being the killer, and maybe she has like a split personality, but they were referring to substernal colon colloid. Let's keep that in our notebooks to remember for future episodes. They bring up the potential relationship between Ben and Kimber after the public apology he gave to the cast the night of his death. Charles initially dismisses Kimber as the killer because the woman being the killer has been done before, as Mabel believes that whoever the killer is the one missing a handkerchief, which was given to the cast opening night as a gift. Now, I could personally see Ben and Kimber being in some type of romantic relationship because going back to episode 1, and when he first met her, he had mentioned something on the lines of, we're in their first love scene, even though there wasn't an actual love scene in the play, and of course him saying sorry to her about making their relationship complicated. But I think that he was possibly interested in someone else, and I'll share that with you all a little bit later, as Mabel learns that she has been banned from rehearsals due to her investigating the murder, and Oliver doesn't want that stress because of his recent health scare, so the plan is for her to go to Ben's penthouse to search for some clues. Meanwhile, Charles' job is to discover the cast member who's mixing their hanky. As Mabel runs into Talbot in the elevator, who claims to be heading to Ben's place to pick up some equipment. Now, I know this was probably a throwaway line, but when Talbot said that his mom was insane because she named him that, here's my insane theory here. What if growing up he wanted to be a star and he never made it, but his mom killed someone thinking that she was helping his career, but instead she ruined it, and instead for being in movies now, he has to make them? Yes, I know that is a crazy idea, but I keep thinking about the death rattle story of a woman willing to kill to protect someone that she loved, and I feel like that's going to play a big part of who the actual killer is. But also, sticking on Talbot, we have to remember the relationship between him and Ben. I was thinking about, he was there to shoot a movie for Ben, and I keep thinking that Ben maybe had faked his death being a part of his movie, but then it ended up going wrong. But let me know what you all think about all my theories so far. As I digress, getting back into, as we see them looking inside Ben's place, and Mabel is amazed. But I did notice a very brief shot of Ben behind her in this type of portrait, and the camera kind of focuses on that picture, but in particularly, he looks completely different, right? He has an interesting mustache. Now, there's nothing wrong with having a mustache, right? But I thought about some of the comments you all left in my video last week, and some of you all have brought up the point that in some of the earlier scenes in episode 1, you all think that Ben might have a twin because there were some shots where Ben had a tattoo and there were other shots when he didn't have a tattoo. So you all got me thinking that there might be a twin and possibly a triplet out there. Very interesting stuff, but I think that that was very intentional for them to focus on that picture. As Loretta, who has been missing from last week's episode, finally appears to rehearsals, she tells Oliver that Dickie has recently become her manager. And again, going back to my previous video, I had mentioned that I do feel as though Dickie and potentially Loretta are two people to keep an eye out for. And this is where kind of my head went when thinking about them two. So please stay with me in this rabbit hole. What if Ben's twin brother, claiming to be Ben, is working with Loretta, who used to babysit the twins, and Dickie was their older brother, and they came together to kill the real movie star Ben for unknown reasons right now, probably something involving money or jealousy. But then Loretta and Dickie decided to kill the fake Ben twin because he felt bad for killing his brother. He was going to the police. Yeah, that's where my head's at, but maybe somewhere in that crazy theory, the real Ben is still alive and he killed the fake Ben who was pretending to be him. I'm just playing with you all's theory with it being twins, and I think that there might be triplets. Again, remember the number 3 in this breakdown. We learned that Dickie's got Loretta an audition for a network show, which is a spin-off of Grey's Anatomy. Loretta, who actually believes in a musical, suggests that they should go big and wild if they're gonna make this play pop. Back with Talbot claiming to be looking for a missing boom mic and Mabel claiming to be looking for a signed headshot, Talbot addresses the elephant in the room and he knows that they're both there lying. They should go their separate ways, but then Dickie arrives. Now we see Dickie appears to be very upset about Ben's death as he throws something at a lamp, and as that is going on, we have Talbert and Mabel hiding in a closet, and this is the complete opposite of a long story short. As Talbert talks about his time filming overseas, he shares this sad story about an elephant, but the point of the story being he has to capture the story as he tells Mabel that the night of Ben's death, Ben had took Talbert's camera, but he didn't realize that it was still recording, hence why Talbert was searching around this place. He now has that footage. Now I think it's pretty obvious or clear as day that they got chemistry. I'm talking about Talbert and Mabel, and I can see a potential romance brewing between the two as we have Detective Mabel, who manages to take the actual footage from Talbert's pocket. Now back with Oliver and Charles, who, by the way, the rehearsal went pretty bad, but Charles takes this opportunity to bond with the cast, who wants to throw Oliver under the bus, with his permission of course, as Kimber mentions that she's been wanting to feel some type of emotion. She's been wanting to cry about the death of Ben, but she can't. Very interesting lines, which I think it's purposeful to make us think it's her, and we'll talk about her a little bit later. Meanwhile, Loretta stayed behind, and man, I swear, Meryl Streep is just perfect in everything she's in, as she has this really great scene with Oliver as they connect, and she is expressing what makes him special, and he plays the nanny lullaby scene. Very great moment there. As we have Dickie walking in again on another potential couple in the works, and he lets Loretta know that she got the part, and she has a guaranteed season picked up, but unfortunately it starts in a week and it requires her to go to LA during Oliver's play. But man, Oliver ain't here to celebrate long as he rips the rug from under her and he tells her that she's under contract, and he stands by the decision and he won't let her pursue her dreams. Man, Oliver, what a dream crusher in that moment. As we cut to Detective Mabel, yes, I said detective because I do believe she will be a detective by the end of this season. I mean, just look at the way she's dressed in this scene, as she needs Talbert to give her the password to unlock the footage, and she shares with him that Greg wasn't the killer of Ben, and Talbert agrees to help her, and he doesn't want to stand by and watch like he did in his Eleven story, as it now appears that we have a new member, a part of the murder-solving crew. Now we end this episode with Charles telling Oliver that the cast doesn't want to do the musical, as Loretta arrives and she's prepared for the pitch in the musical for Donna and Clifton. Oliver breaks his contract with Loretta and he wants her to perform the nanny lullaby for the producers that will be arriving pretty soon. Now Loretta beautifully performs the nanny song, and Clifford convinces his mom that they should do the musical because he loves it. Now we see that Talbert and Mabel are looking at this footage, and Ben is talking to a mysterious person, and he tells this person they're not supposed to be there, they're not sweet, they're mad. He wants this person so badly, but they can't do this because it's gonna ruin his career. Now I don't know about y'all, but when they played that scene, I was screaming at the screen, who is he talking to? Obviously they couldn't reveal that so early, but we see Loretta reveals to Oliver that she's gonna be staying. They kiss as Charles tries to get the hanky from Kimber, as she tells him, oh, she must have thrown it away or donated it for a good cause. As we see Charles texts Mabel the news, Kimber doesn't have her hanky. I'll give a shout out to my man Charles. Now it took him to the end of the episode to find out, but he eventually got it done. Now as we end this episode, we see them having this joining duet between Loretta and Kimber, and it is revealed that the person talking at the beginning of this episode was actually Kimber. Now, was it me, or did the camera intentionally focus on three people in this last scene? One of them being Kimber, and the other two being Loretta, who kept looking at Dickie when she was singing, and I can't leave out earlier in this episode when she told Oliver about the news of Dickie being her manager, she said that Dickie was sweet. Is there a romance going on between Dickie and Loretta, going back to my nanny and her babysitting the twins? But we end up with the quote being saying, when there is a spark that finally catches fire and everyone sees it, the only place you want to be is at the center of that fire. But what if one person is shining a bit brighter than the others? Sometimes you can't help it because it's a competitive business and you may have to stuff them out, and she looks at Loretta, who's clearly now the new lead of the musical. can't be that simple, right? An unforbidden love gone wrong between Ben and Kimber, who wants the spotlight and he took it from her. It can't be that simple, right? Now, maybe she could have had someone kill Ben potentially, but I'm thinking a little bit more bigger than that, right? I think there's a bigger thing going on. I want to go back to this musical now having triplets, not having two killers like we've had in some previous seasons. Like, obviously, season 1, we had a killer being Jan. Season 2, we obviously had two killers, Becky and her detective boyfriend. What if we have 3 killers this time around? And right now, my 3 killers, again, putting my theory aside for a second with the twins and the triplets and Dickie being involved, but what if we're looking at Kimber, Loretta, and I said it last week, KT? The reason I keep bringing up KT is because we had her being seen as the person that has access to the hair and makeup and the design of the set, which would explain how she was able to get access to being in Ben's dressing room. What if it was her that he was talking to? I can't be with you because it can ruin my career. A movie star dating a set designer that's probably a nobody in some's eyes. But also, I want to go back to the beginning of this episode when they showed us the previously on. They intentionally showed the scene with KT, who had the hanky in her hand after they go to that after party. So I have some suspicions about KT, y'all. Let me know if you all are feeling the same thing. But going back to my whole theme of the number 3, this being the 3rd season. Again, season 1, we had 1 killer. Season 2, we had 2 killers. Now, season 3, we might have 3. And this is me going back to my whole triplet thing. Ben and Loretta, her being the nanny. And listen, going back to my man Paul Rudd, he has a history of playing multiple versions of himself. With the recent film with Marvel, with the Ant-Man and the Wasp Quantumanium, there was many versions of him in that film. But also, if you all have ever seen the Netflix series Living With Yourself, he played a clone of himself. So it doesn't seem too far out of the possibilities of Paul Rudd wanting to play maybe 1 or 2 versions of himself in this new season. Question: do we spend enough time loving ourselves? As Mabel seeks her own new sanctuary, we get the return of Cinda, who's trying to move past her own difficult time with her old killer ex-employee Poppy and trying to make a return from being canceled. Friend 62 Fishes, we see that Joy is getting settled in with recently moving in with Charles, as we will see later that this was only step 1 with a major shift coming in her relationship. As Charles is nervous about rehearsals because since he can't sing, Oliver wants him to do a Patterson, aka a rap, which sends him into madness in this episode. Now Oliver, aka the most unlandable bachelor, is in love and he is off the market, bruh. He's workshopping a way to ask Loretta out for a date, which, speaking of Loretta, is it a coincidence that she's only appeared in every other episode so far this season? Is it a Meryl Streep scheduling issue, or is it important to the story that she only pops up when it involves rehearsals and everything revolving around this play? Where was Loretta? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments section, as Oliver really hopes that Kimber isn't the killer because she's an influencer with over 2 million TikTok-y people, which would obviously be great press for the show. Now, right now, Mabel's working theory is that maybe Kimber poisoned Ben with her anti-aging serum, which, by the way, I love when the show gets meta because it's hilarious that they're poking fun of the reality of how a lot of us are saying that Paul Rudd, the actor, seems to be de-aging backwards like Benjamin Button. So I love when the show is super meta. But we see the cast has arrived for rehearsal time, and it's time for Charles's rap. Now, we know the newly revived musical has the triplets this time around, but more importantly, Oliver has the babies as the main suspects to the murder and calls them homicidal later on in this episode, which gives me even more reason to think that there are triplets involved when it comes to Ben's murder. But back with Charles, who begins performing, and all of a sudden he starts rapping and goes off the rails and snaps into the White Room. Now, in the White Room, it's all white, he's happy and dancing, and he starts to pick up a roller for painting and starts to kiss it, but hears these mysterious monkey sounds in the background and he finally snaps back into reality. Now, in reality, his pants are off, he's holding the dolls, he has it in one hand, he has shoes in the other hand, and everyone is shocked what just transpired as Charles learns what happened is called the White Room. Now, in the White Room, this is where you blank out and it happens to actors, but it sounds like it exclusively happens to stage acting, which got me thinking. This is triggered by anxiety. Would have been who was making his stage debut might have experienced his own white room on stage when he died that first night. Now, I know you might be asking, well, he's a movie star. Why would he be nervous to be on stage? Well, this is where my mind is going. Maybe the Ben that was on stage wasn't the real Ben, it was the twin Ben, and I just can't shake the twin triplets theories. Let me know if you guys were kind of thinking the same thing. But as it is suggested, we see that Charles has to find his happy place. Now, I don't want to leave out in this scene that Howard, once again, brings up his mysterious cousin, Moses Morris, who I, at this point, have to believe is going to play a pivotal role later in this season. Now, speaking of Howard, he allows our team to enter the theater where the plan is to investigate Kimber's dressing room for clues. As Charles shares his recent experience with Joy, she suggests that he makes an omelet because that's his happy place, and surprise, it actually works. Now, Joy wants him to lean into her instead, and she wants to be his omelet. She wants to be his happy place, and she leads into the bedroom with this conversation, which you'll notice those monkey noises she was making for them to head to the bedroom is the same noises that he was hearing in his white room scene, which, let's take a look at this scene here. Now, I know she seems to be a loving partner, and I like Joy, don't get me wrong, but I'm very suspicious about Joy, especially after this episode. But is she coming on a little bit too strong for you all? Let me know if you guys are getting those same vibes. But I want to talk about the dialogue in the scene with Joy and Charles as she tells him, I'm going to look out for you, just like I did with Ben. If he touched a hair on your head, he knew he would have to deal with me. So let's examine that dialogue there. Well, now we can connect that maybe obviously that reveals what's going to happen later in this episode, but what does this also confirm? Does her saying that confirm the line back in the season 2 finale where we saw Charles yelling at Ben, leave her alone? Is it now confirmed that the her was Joy in that scene? We'll talk about that a little bit later, but back with Oliver and Mabel, they enter Kimber's dressing room where, surprise, she's actually there. Now, Kimber reveals that she uses this room to build her fashion, her kind of makeup empire. As Mabel has to dig into the de-aging serum, she also has to dig in her own bag to kind of use some modern lingo to have girl talk, you know.
Mama, yeah, we're like, yes, the work and slay, and yes, over here, like, yeah. Yes, queens.
And she has to put her old woman energy aside to do so. As Mabel and Kimber talk over dog food, Mabel discovers that Kimber and Ben's showmance was only transactional, with her wanting to use him as an endorsement online, but he never held up his end of the bargain, which is why she felt fine with selling his hanky on eBay, which explains the missing hanky from last week, which now puts her character in the clear for now. But she does also let Mabel know that the night of his death, he had a mysterious red mark on his face and had to call someone special in to remove it, which they did, and they worked their own little magic to do so. So the question is, what was the red mark on Ben's face? Was it some type of hidden birthmark? Was it a mark left after getting hit in the face? Or, I know some of you all pointed this out last week, that the scene that we saw him talking to himself in the dressing room, which was captured on camera, maybe he was talking to Cookie, and maybe he had some type of bad allergic reaction, or was that even the real Ben? Now, the reason I bring up the whole is that the real Ben part is, if you all remember back in episode 1 when he returned from coming back from the dead, look at the picture on the screen now. He has a red mark by his mouth. Is that the same red mark that Kimber was talking to? And it fuels my whole that maybe there's two Bens and there's a twin walking around? Let me know what you all think about that in the comments below. As Charles and Oliver show Mabel a very interesting message left behind on Ben's mirror, calling him a pig, and now the crew believes that the lipstick belongs to the killer. Now, we wrap up the episode with Mabel finally meeting with the person who was messaging her throughout the episode, which happens to be Cinda, who wants to hire Mabel to host a new killer podcast. Now, we see Mabel slips up and lets her know that she's working on the Ben case, and Cinda obviously want to monetize the situation, and she thinks this is a great way to open up this new show. And let's just take a moment and think about this position that Mabel's in. This doesn't sound like a bad idea. We know she's looking for a new place. We know that this is a good, consistent paying job, so it looks pretty good. But the catch is she won't be able to bring Oliver or Charles into this situation. So let me know, what do you all think Mabel's going to do? Will she work with Cinder or will she decline her? Let me know in the comments section. Back to Charles, take 2 with his rap. He adds his own personal touch with his moves, kind of mimicking him making the omelets, aka his happy place, but Oliver, he hates it, which unfortunately sends Charles back into the White Room. Now, Charles and Oliver have a heart-to-heart about the current living situation with Joy, and the plan is to have Charles tell her that he doesn't want to live with her anymore because he seems to think that he has to be alone and he can't live with people, which also, during this scene, Oliver officially asks Loretta for a dinner date, which to me means that we're going to get the return of Loretta next week. We see Charles dances around the conversation with Joy, letting her know that he wants her to move out, but unfortunately, this conversation triggers him, and once again, he enters the White Room yet again, but he comes out this time with a very shocking revelation. Now, before we get into that revelation, theory time. Charles was triggered by talking to his girlfriend about her moving out. That had nothing to do with the rap song or anything to do with the musical, which makes me think maybe a cast member who's also experienced the White Room in the past, maybe the same thing happens to them. It's like a triggering thing that you can never shake off. So whether it's a social anxiety, you have to give someone bad news, that's when it pops up. So maybe someone in the cast had a similar situation to them, and I'm referring to Ben. Maybe Ben had his own White Room situation, and while he had to apologize to everyone, it triggered that, and maybe he fell down the elevator himself. That's where my mind's at right now. But getting back to the breakdown, as Oliver and Mabel walk into seeing Charles asking Joy to marry him, and of course she says yes, but we also learn that she was the owner of the lipstick. I should say now his fiance is the owner of the lipstick, which connects her to the person that might have left that message on the mirror, and presumably this was the last person to see Ben before he died on the stage for the very first time. Man, I tell you, Charles has a thing for women with dark and mysterious past, but I'll be honest, I personally don't think that Joy killed Ben because it would be just too similar to season 1 with Joy and obviously mixing that with Jan, which by the way, it is kind of funny that both of their names start with J. But let's just take a moment and let's just put Joy as one of our main suspects. Now, point out a couple things. When it comes to that message on the mirror, maybe someone came into the dressing room, they have a key to his dressing room, and they left that message for him. So it doesn't necessarily mean that Joy was the one to write that message. Also, the fact that if you think about it, she was missing her lipstick, looking for it, which means that this was something important to her, so you don't think that she would have left that in the dressing room if it was so important to her to complete her set. But again, sticking to Joy might be involved with this murder. Let's tie in our connection so far. Leave her alone line that we know from season 2 finale. Pair it with the video footage of Ben, paired with now her being a makeup artist, and if we are assuming that it was her in the dressing room, it begs the question, were they close? Remember, Ben's first role was on Charles' show, and we know that Joy was on the set of that show 35 years ago. So did Joy and Ben know each other? Did she know him as a kid? Did she get him that gig? Which makes me think, was she the nanny? You know, I was thinking that Loretta was the nanny of the potential triplets or twins. Do they have a relationship? And also, was the person that Ben was on the phone with at the after party, was that a call from Joy? Let me know if Joy and Ben have a relationship. And one more theory I want to throw out, and this is a theory I talked about in my last video. The threes, the triplets, everything is kind of connecting to 3. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Charles, in this very episode, he visited the White Room 3 times. So again, the number 3 seems to be very important, and I do think that 3 people are involved in Ben's death. Oh, love. You gotta love it. Everywhere you look, there it is. And in a city that never sleeps, how the hell do you really know who you're sleeping with? People can keep some very dirty secrets or fatally fatal flaws. As Charles is yet to ask his new fiance about the pig message left on Ben's dressing room mirror, he's on the fence about if his Joy could possibly be another Jan. But we're gonna have to put that conversation on hold for a second because they notice how Mabel's dressed very nicely as she tells them she's meeting Talbot to go on a stakeout on a lead, aka a date. They are headed out for a taste test for the wedding as Charles tries to bring up how did Joy's lipstick end up in Ben's dressing room. Now she deflects this and she actually takes offense of these allegations, and heads out to this testing taste alone. Now, while that's happening, we have the return of Zaz, who's here to celebrate Charles' engagement, but ends up becoming his therapist. As we cut to Oliver, who arrives to Loretta's place for their date, as she prepares her overcooked chops, Oliver accidentally takes out her pull-out bed and makes things a little bit awkward. Now, is it me, or did they make it a point to bring up that Loretta's microwave was broken and that she was forced to use her oven?
I'm a woman with a broken microwave, which is why I'm forced to improvise with this prehistoric broiler that I never use. I zap a perfectly baked one in my microwave, but it's broken, and now my timing, the temperature, all thrown off.
Anyone else think that maybe she made some cookies in the past and may have left them in someone's dressing room, and that same person might have eaten them and might have been poisoned? That's where my mind's at right now. But speaking of dates, Mabel meets with Talbot and finds out that the person he thought was a suspect was Jonathan. But after following him around, he found nothing on him except that he's got an amazing singing voice, and comes forth with this being a creative way to bring her out on a date. Now, I don't know if lying's a good way to start off any relationship, which makes me pose this question. Is all this a distraction to get Mabel off the focus of the case? Can we trust Talbot? Now, I know you're supposed to get to know someone when you're on a date, but the questions he's asking her seems to be stemming around Charles and Oliver and how they solved the previous murders. Sounds like someone who wants to find their weaknesses, and also sounds like someone that wants to know if he's on their murder board. He even says in this episode that luckily it's taken a bit longer for them to solve this case, as he continues to drink the night away with Mabel and gets her a little bit tipsy. Now, I know he's just being nice, he could be a nice guy, he's just taking notice of her interest, which happens to be murder. But let's take a look at this. The history of the show has shown us that Oscar back in season 1 and Alice in season 2, they like to make us think that Mabel's love interest can be the killer at first, only to find out that they're not. So could we be looking at this same example with this new relationship, or is Talbot potentially involved in the death of Ben? As Zaz shares her wacky theories that maybe the killer was trying to kill Charles, because she's been hearing some chatter that some people wish that Charles was the one that died. Now, I wonder if that's a plot that we could be exploring in this season, or are they planning Easter eggs for a season 4 plot of someone out there trying to kill Charles? She drops more bombs on him as she lets him know that she has been talking to Jan and dating Jan. That's right, the killer from season 1, which I'm very curious if Jan will be a part of season 3, because they've already used that card of like, let's talk to a killer to try to find a killer. Let me know if you all would like to see Jan this season. I personally will, because I like Amy as an actress, but I don't know if she will pop up in this 3rd season. But going back to Zaz, she doesn't believe that Joy is the killer, and she wants to prove this by curing Charles' case of the MGDS, as she convinces him that his future wife isn't a killer, and points out how Charles might be afraid of lowercase Joy, not uppercase Joy, as Charles wants to do right by his new fiance, but it might be too little too late. Now, back with Oliver, who loses a tooth in Loretta's chops, they have a laugh about it, and she brings up how she loves Oliver's little snort, and brings up how many times she's played a pig in previous plays, and suddenly uses the exact same words that were found on Ben's mirror, and even brings up how much of a pig Ben was. Now, we see Oliver kind of immediately connects the dots to her comments, but she avoids talking about what she meant, and things get a little bit silent, but Loretta comes up with this idea to take him somewhere special to fix his tooth. The special place is a ferry, as Oliver smokes a joint with Loretta that's been waiting to be smoked for decades, as he learns that she's been a fan of his for years and would have killed to be a part of one of his productions, but something's always went wrong or came up last minute. She claims that she thinks that maybe she's been cursed for something she's done in her past. Now, I find it very funny that she used the word curse, because if you all remember back in episode 1 of this very season, Oliver said that he was cursed with his recent issues with his productions. So I thought that was an interesting correlation that she used the word curse there, but I also don't think it's a coincidence that Loretta was at that same party where she got this joint from 40 years ago. Maybe Oliver was her first big obsession. We can do many things. One of them can lead to people divulging secrets, as Loretta reveals that she did call Ben a pig after getting into a fight with him opening night. She claims that Ben told her that she was obsessed with him and didn't want to be on the same stage with a no-name, and all this was right before he collapsed. But she wasn't the one who wrote on the mirror, she claims. As she shares her family tooth fairy tradition with Oliver, they ultimately kiss. Now, I 100% think that there is more to that story. While Loretta gets Oliver high, Talbot gets Mabel a little tipsy, as they see Jonathan acting very suspicious with the mystery guy as he exchanges an envelope with him, but they end up getting noticed by Jonathan after Mabel bumps into Talbot and they make a scene. Now, initially, I thought this was going to be revealed to be that this Morris guy, but Talbot knows this mystery guy. He's Ben's private doctor, and they call him Dr. C. So now the question is, what the hell was Jonathan and him talking about? What were they exchanging? Is this a potential misdirect? Is he having an affair with this doctor? Did he get some medical advice from the doctor? Or is it something more involved with Ben's murder? Let me know your thoughts on this conversation in the comment section as we end this episode with Joy admitting that she was backstage with Ben opening night. Now, Howard had called her because Ben was hit in the face and he obviously needed that to be gone, which answers our question about where that red mark came from. She helped him out, and she claims that she must have dropped her lipstick, and that's the end of her story. But she's not the only one that was keeping secrets that night, as it is revealed that Charles was indeed the person who hit Ben after seeing what happened between Ben and Loretta. Now that solves the question we had from last season. Who was Charles referring to with Ben when he said leave her alone? Well, I guess it's safe to assume that he was referring to the night where he saw Loretta and Ben getting into it, and he was talking to Ben about leaving Loretta alone. Stopping for a second, what exactly was Ben and Loretta doing up there? Why was he grabbing her? What is his side of the story? Hope we get to see what actually happened and if there is more to Ben's perspective of what happened there. But as Charles continues to put his foot in his mouth, he tells her that he accidentally proposed to her, and that just sucks all the joy out of the room as Charles is ready to open up, but it's too late. She calls off the engagement. Now we see Talbot telling Mabel that he was confident about tonight, but he didn't expect to see her murder board, which goes back to me saying maybe this was all intentional and he wanted to see the murder board. Very interesting choice of words there. But now after showing him this board, she takes the lead, which leads him to the bedroom. Which, speaking of bedroom, we see what Loretta and Oliver both had for dessert as Loretta draws a bath and Oliver discovers a photo from a newspaper about Ben as he finds a secret journal showing that she's been obsessing over Ben for his whole career. So right now, Oliver and Mabel both have romantic relationships, but which of these relationships are genuine, or are both of them working together to hide this murder? Speaking of working together, where's Dickie? Where has he been this whole time? Is he as innocent as we see Loretta keep saying, oh, he's a sweet boy, he's a sweet brother? Where is Dickie during all this? But I can't shake the fact that Talbot continues to tell Mabel little lies. His initial story to her about why he was in Ben's apartment was a lie. His Eleven story was initially a lie, and now this whole let me get you on a date was a lie. I have a feeling that he has more lies and secrets he's not telling her, and I just can't put my finger on exactly what he's hiding because, again, this show has shown us that her love interest can just be a red herring. But let's talk about Loretta, who we're assuming is some type of super fan. It first started off with Oliver 40 years ago, and she just would kill to be in one of his productions. Did she kill Ben because she really wanted to be the headliner in his production? Is she some super obsessive fan of Ben? Did someone plant that journal in her apartment, or has she been following him his whole career? Going back to love interest, Joy didn't lie, but she did hold the fact that she went into Ben's dressing room the night that he ended up getting that poison in him, which also, just speaking of all the lies, the Loretta moment with Ben, was that a lie? Hell, even Charles didn't tell Mabel and Oliver about him punching Ben that night. So there are so many lies and so many made up stories being told right now that it's really throwing me off. So I don't know who to trust, who's telling the truth right now. There's a lot of deception going on. Theaters are known for their ghosts. The year was 1919 as we discover rising star Gideon Gooseberry, who on opening night was killed by a 300-pound sandbag that fell on him from the rafters, which created an urban legend. Now, legend has it, if you don't sweep away Gideon's energy from the stage every night, well, he'll haunt your production. As Oliver studies Loretta's secret journal, he notices that her F and her P's look very similar to the ones left on Ben's mirror. When you make the stage a part of your life, it can be hard to escape your personal ghost too. As Charles is alone in his apartment with President McKinney after Joy has left him, we see Mabel get to knock on the door from Howard, who's here to confess that he's killed Ben. Ben sweep on opening night and he blames Ben's death on the ghost of Gideon Gooseberry. He says that he meant to sweep that night, but when he went to get the broom out of KT's office, it was locked and he heard some strange noises from within. Y'all don't forget about my theory on KT a couple weeks ago, and I have more thoughts on her a little bit later in today's breakdown, but Howard doesn't stop there. While sweeping in preparation for the crew to make their return, he claims he saw the ghost of Gideon in his signature cap and red coat, which happens to be the same look and description of Dr. C from last week's episode. But spoiler alert, as the guys learn of Mabel's new situation with Talbot added to the team as they have a sidebar piecing together Dr. C going to the theater to cover his tracks. Now, a noticeable little detail in this scene here, as it's mentioned that Oliver has a new tooth, which Mabel describes it as being as bright as a headlight. Now, I have a feeling that will be a callback at some point in this season, and that bright tooth might end up saving somebody. As Charles fills the team in with his recent breakup with Joy, which he seems to be handling pretty well because he claims he's done this same song and dance before, as Mabel notices that Oliver is now all of a sudden interested in his case for the first time since believing that someone from his production could be the murderer. But we all know as an audience, he's now interested because he's hoping to prove that Loretta isn't the killer. Now, Talbot will not be tagging along as finally the dynamic three, which I've been mentioning before how important the number 3 has been so far this season, they will be working together to investigate the theater, but unfortunately, this team up won't be lasting much longer. As the crew arrives with Howard and they notice immediately strange things with the ghost light going off all of a sudden, which is always supposed to be on, as Oliver suggests they split up to do their own thing while he can do his side mission, but Mabel dismisses that and she won't allow it, and boom, out of nowhere, 2 sandbags fall and almost kills Charles, which this show is telling us that something bad might be happening to our Charles, guys, because go back to last season when they had to fake his death in the finale. You think about the last episode, Zaz telling him that some people wish that he died instead of for Ben. I know Oliver's the one with the heart issue right now, but what if they're setting up that Charles might not make it to the end of this season? Or with the 2 bags falling and one being left up, is that like a symbolism of maybe Charles and Oliver dies, leaving Mabel alive and by herself? Again, the importance of the number 3 being brought up yet again. KT and Howard are responsible for looking into why those bags fell, giving our crew a chance to look around. Did anyone notice the Act 1, Page 1 that KT was highlighting and she had to get rid of? Were there any significant clues on that page? Because obviously it's a page of the script, and I noticed that she highlighted something in green and orange. Now, I couldn't make out whose lines those were, but I know for a fact that it isn't a coincidence that the camera intentionally panned over to her doing that. Let me know what you all were able to piece out. I wasn't able to zoom in to see what those actual lines meant and if they have some significance to this story. Now, meanwhile, we see Mabel sees the attendance sheet and she wants to look at each cast member's signature to compare to the message left on Ben's mirror. But yet again, Oliver tries to make sure Loretta isn't noticed as a prime suspect. Which, on that note, which one do you all lean towards more? Do you all personally think that deep down Oliver believes that Loretta might have killed Ben? Or is he just so in love that he doesn't want to believe it? Let me know your thoughts on where you stand on Oliver right now. But I do appreciate how Charles calls out Mabel's short-sightedness of allowing Talbot to see their murder board. But I also love the parallels between Oliver and Mabel, both allowing their guards to be down because of their romantic interests. We see Mabel gets a little bit personal by saying that she has a better track record of picking people, unlike Charles, who we know that was a low blow because she she was talking about Jan, as she also says that Talbot has done more in these 2 days than Charles has done in this whole entire case. Meanwhile, Oliver sneaks out. Charles is looking for water for his fish, leaving Mabel alone yet again. Now, I've lost count so far this season, but this has been a theme that the guys have kept leaving Mabel alone to figure this case out by herself. Now, I know that this just gives her more reason to take up Cinna's offer, which we'll talk about at the end of this episode, but maybe this is more evidence that maybe the guys won't make it through this entire season. Charles finds a place for his new fish and he gets trapped inside this closet and almost flushes the fish down the toilet. It accidentally turns on a smoke machine, leaving him to deal with that for most of the second half of this episode. Also, I do want to add, I don't think it's a coincidence that the fish name is the same name of the 25th president of the United States, which is McKinney, which, by the way, was assassinated. I don't know if there's any correlation going back to where Charles might die this season, but checking in with Oliver, who's comparing the F and the P, and he hears a noise in the background and he follows that noise. He finds this secret lair and is taken down by this mysterious person who ends up being revealed to be Jerry, who we're meeting for the first time this season. Now, we learn from Jerry he's been pretending to actually be the ghost of Gideon, not Dr. C, and he's been the one causing all those lights going off. But I do want to point out, the hat and that red jacket, that seems to me to be a clue about there might be a connection with Jerry and Dr. C, because I don't think it's a coincidence. They have the exact same description, the exact same look of Dr. C from last week. Now, we see Jerry killing a rat in front of Oliver, which may be a sign of Oliver's current situation. Now, I just happened to Google, what does it mean when you kill a rat, or in particular when you dream about killing a rat? When you look it up, it represents anxiety, obstacles in life's path, and insecurity surrounding financing and personal relationships. If you guys ask me, that sounds exactly what Oliver is going through right now. As Jerry tells Oliver about Loretta's violent temper, he fills him in on what he saw, what went down opening night. He recalls them rehearsing their fight scene, and he claims that something set her off, which resorted to her calling him a pig, and Oliver learns that Charles actually punched Ben that same night. Checking in with Katie and Howard, she wasn't the one who locked her office door, which I don't think was ever addressed in this episode, but it might be important for future episodes. But Katie knows all about Gideon, as we learn that Howard's secret dream at one point of his younger days was becoming an actor, but his dreams were crushed by his own mother. And we also learned that Katie wanted to be a director. Stick with me here on this wild theory. We know that Ben hired a cinematographer in Talbot, but what if he also hired KT as his director? Because I wasn't really thinking too much into this scene between KT and Howard and bonding over Gideon, him finding his voice, yada yada yada. But would this be a perfect match to have Ben finding his cinematographer to fake pretend his death and have a director set it all up? But what if things just went too far and he accidentally was killed in making this movie? We'll get into KT a little bit more, but that's kind of where my head's at right now with KT and this whole Howard scene. But going back to it all, as KT gives Howard the only way to banish Gideon is to invite him on stage, he recites his monologue from the night that he died, and they have a little bit of a moment. But again, I think that that moment between them is very significant. Check in with Mabel, who finds Talbot, who's followed Jonathan to the theater, and they end up following him. Now, they find Jonathan with a bag of pills, and he confesses that he's been very stressed out over taking Ben's lead role, and he needed something to take off the edge, which ended up leading him to Dr. C. Dr. C gave him the same prescription he did Ben, which was called the Leading Man Cocktail, and Jonathan didn't want this burden of actually being the lead. So right now, we can remove him being the killer off the list for now, but it's very important to note that Ben was on a lot of drugs on this cocktail on the night that he died. There was a dash of meth that didn't appear on his autopsy. Does it mean that maybe my theory that I mentioned a couple weeks ago of him having a twin brother is still valid? And maybe Dr. C killed the real actor Ben with this whole cocktail. He ended up messing with his autopsy to cover up his tracks because he gave him that prescription and he doesn't want to lose his doctor license. I think Dr. C is still someone we should be keeping an eye out for. But wrapping up the episode, we see Oliver gets advice from Jerry on making a decision on what he should do with Loretta. As Charles finally makes it out of the closet, he and Mabel chase down Oliver into Ben's dressing room, where Oliver is just losing his mind at this point. He's made his choice. He's siding with his love, Loretta, not killing Ben. So he begins to wipe away the evidence. Oliver, what the hell are you doing, my man? As he tells Mabel Mabel about Charles punching Ben as they get into this argument over Oliver's chaotic production, and then Oliver throws out that Charles' career was on the rocks. They have a fight. We see Charles ultimately quits the play, and now Oliver brings all this heat to Mabel when Loretta is brought up. Now we see Oliver completely erases the pig message, and he won't allow Mabel's investigation to jeopardize his career moment with this play. As Mabel is fed up with what's going on right now, she wants the guys to no longer be a part of this case. She is determined to find Ben's killer because we know how important Ben was to her when she was grieving the death of her father. Now Howard believes he's done his job with Gideon, and KT applauds him, which seemed very odd because we know Jerry wasn't there messing with them, as we know he was the one behind the Gideon ghost, but we see KT might be the one that's up to this. That smile at the end seemed very devious to me. I think she might be directing something that we don't know about quite yet, but we officially have Team Tomei, which I'm naming Talbert and Mabel Tomei, that's their shipping name, as Charles is alone with his fish and Oliver is determined to get his moment to shine in the spotlight. As we see the curtains closing on this episode, there are 3 stick figures that were made by Jerry. Again, 3 is everywhere this season, and I am sticking with my theory that there are 3 people involved in this murder. Which, speaking of, let's take a look at this suspect list. So far we've removed Kimber, we've removed Joy, now we can remove Jonathan. So that leaves us with KT, Tobert, Loretta, and Dickie. Now for Tobert, you all know I don't trust the guy. He's been lying to her this entire season. I'm referring to Mabel, and I honestly think with him being hired by Ben, he's still doing something behind the scenes that might be tied to Ben's twin. So I do not trust him, ladies and gentlemen. And I said it last week, we've already gotten 2 fake outs with Mabel's love interest with Alice and Oscar. I think the 3rd time's a charm. I think he has something to do with it. Dickie, I'm still kind of fused about Dickie. He hasn't been around for the last 2 episodes, but I've seen you all's comments about maybe Loretta being Dickie's son, or if I believe too much in that theory, but I don't think it's a coincidence that she has this type of appreciation for him that doesn't make sense because they just met. So there is definitely some type of history between Dickie and Loretta, which, speaking of Loretta, mentioned it a couple times. Why is she only in every other episode? Is it almost too obvious that she's involved? Last but not least, KT. I mentioned it. I think that she has been up to something, and now it being revealed that she's wanted to be a director this whole time. I wouldn't be surprised if she got that opportunity being hired by Ben, or maybe it's Ben's twin brother. That's where I'm at with my suspect list.
Things are made to last. From place to place, generation to generation, you keep the things that the people you care for can stay with you. Because when they're gone and their memories fade away, what the hell else keeps them alive? As we learn that Uma is a little bit of a thief, as we get a really nice flashback of her hanging out with Bunny. Now within this flashback, we learn that she likes to take and keep other people's things, dead or alive, as we see on the night of Ben's second death, she took his missing hanky. Uma nicely gives Charles tips on eating alone. We see Charles and her share a sandwich over what happened between him and the crew, as she tells him that he should make up with them before it's too late and they die, which Charles doesn't believe they'll be dying anytime soon. But I would like to mention, and I talked about in the last few episodes, the show keeps giving us this type of hint that maybe 1 or 2 of our main characters may have something bad happen to them. I don't want us to forget that Oliver still has a heart condition, and I'm very curious if that's going to come back into play before the season ends. Not to jump too far ahead, but will Oliver's heart condition be the thing that brings Mabel back into the fold? As Uma leaves and makes Charles pay for her breakfast, lunch, and dinner, he notices that Ben's hanky is in her purse that she took from him. Mabel moving date has arrived. We get the return of Theo, who last time we saw him was in episode 7 of season 2. After taking some advice from Mabel to start talking to his father again, he's helping her pack. Mabel just wants to get closer to the situation and talk to someone who knew Ben and what happened to him. Theo suggested she go to an auction that Dickie is holding to get rid of some of Ben's movie props from his film Cobra. Meanwhile, our B plot consists of showing Oliver auditioning a bunch of knockoff Charles as Cliff comes up with the perfect replacement and is no other than Ferris Bueller himself, played by Matthew Broderick, who seems to be the perfect fit at first, but Oliver finds out that he's beyond committed to this role, as he's also has a history with taking roles from Charles.
Now, I'll be honest with you all. I'm a fan of Matthew Broderick, and I mean, come on, the cameo of Mel Brooks was great, but I wasn't the biggest fan of this B-plot because it almost felt like it was a filler of this episode. Now, before you get to typing in the comments, I'm not saying this was a filler episode. I just felt as though this plot slowed the momentum down. Now, I get the purpose of this plot. Charles and Oliver have to make up. We have the situation of them figuring out the hanky. All that stuff makes sense. I just feel as though that it wasn't as compelling as the A plot. Mabel, Theo, Dickie, oh bro, that stuff was just really interesting to me. And every time, and look, I love Oliver, love Charles. Again, the cameos are great. It just didn't fit as well for me in this particular episode. Now, again, I'll give it some props. I had some good laughs with Matthew getting on Charles's and Oliver's nerve and him doing all the different takes. But again, it just felt like the A plot was just so strong. And whenever we would cut back to the B plot, it just slowed the momentum down. But we'll tie this back into the overall arching story and themes a little bit later. But before moving on, let's hear a word for the sponsor of today's video, Into the AM. Today's video is sponsored by Into the AM. Into the AM is a clothing company with a variety of amazing products such as t-shirts, hoodies, jackets, shorts and underwear, headwear, and much more. Their t-shirts have unique designs, they're incredibly soft and extremely comfortable, and they're made to last. But the best part is, you can get 10% off by using my discount code MovieFiles when you're selecting your new gear, which you can find that code in the description below. So thank you Into the AM for sponsoring today's video. I love my personal gear and my t-shirts that I own from them. They're so cool. And if you all are looking for some awesome new gear, look no further by clicking the link in the description of this very video to find out more. And if you happen to see something you like from Into the AM, don't hesitate and do not forget to use my discount code. Back into the breakdown, we check in with Mabel and Theo, who Mabel learns that Ben came up with the idea of his biggest franchise, Cobra, when he was a kid, but we'll later find out that might not be the case. As Mabel talks to Dickie, and instead of finessing her way into talking to him about Ben, she jumps right into questioning who was Ben on the phone with on the night that he was on the play, which caused him to rush out of the party, which is a huge question I've had since episode 1, and I just have a feeling in my bones that whoever he was on the phone with could be the killer or have something to do with his death. Clearly, this upset Dickie as he walks away from Mabel. Now, he eventually apologizes to her because he's been stressing out. He's been frustrated, rightfully so. He just lost his brother. Then he goes into more details. He starts to talk about he's just mad about his whole experience with his brother, all the different cover-ups. He's been spending his whole entire life protecting his younger brother. And then he says that Ben always gets the credit. It's just the story of their lives. Now, he doesn't stop there. He goes on to give a very, and I mean huge, reveal about their childhood. Now, Dickie tells Mabel that when they were little, he was always the second behind Ben. His parents always looked at Ben as the miracle child because Dickie was adopted. Now, I've been saying for the last few weeks that I believe that Dickie and Loretta, there's some connection going on between the two, whether that she was the babysitter when they were kids, or maybe there was something romantic between Dickie and Loretta. And I've already addressed, I've seen you all's comments in the comment section talking about how you all feel that Dickie could be the son of Loretta. Now, I never really bought into that theory until now. Now, if it comes to be true that Dickie is the son of Loretta, it kind of makes sense. The whole secret journal that she has wasn't her stalking Ben's career this whole time. It was her looking at her son growing up, right? By the way, I don't think that's probably his real name that she gave him. But let's go back to the opening scene of this season. Now, it showed us who we all assume was Loretta's life, showing her commitment to wanting to be a star by any means necessary, even if that means giving up her son that she might have had at a very important part of her career. Now again, if true, it makes her telling Oliver on the boat a couple weeks ago that she did something terrible in her past and that has haunted her. That makes sense. She gave up her son to chase her dreams. That's something that would probably make someone upset over the years. And all those nice compliments to Dickie. Oh, he's such a nice boy. He helped me with this job that he got. He's the manager of her. It's all starting to kind of make sense in how she would hate Ben and calling him a pig because maybe she saw how he treated Dickie throughout the years of her documenting that with the journal. And as we'll discuss a little bit later, maybe she knew that the idea of Cobra was from her son Dickie. Dickie, and maybe that drawing was from Dickie and he drew that when he actually was a kid. The question is, does Dickie know that that is his mom? Now, I also want to point out, I really enjoyed the connection between Uma and her saying early in the episode how things or items of your loved ones that they leave behind, tying that into what Dickie says in this scene here. A person is just a collection of 1,000 details, and when they're gone, those are the things you miss the most. And I'm not going to lie, when he said that, and just the whole theme of this episode of missing your loved ones, I got a little bit of emotional watching this episode because it's so true to me. I feel like the things that we can cherish and look after, whether it's photos, or a blanket or a sweater, we cherish those items. So while again, I wasn't the biggest fan of that B plot with Charles and Oliver and all that stuff going on, I really enjoyed this plot. To me, it was the saving grace of this episode. But getting back into Dickie and Mabel, he gives her a very important detail, which he mentions that Ben would always set his clock 20 minutes early, which will be very important to helping Mabel get Greg out of prison later on in this episode for a crime that he didn't commit. We see Mabel packing her final things, which by the way, it wasn't revealed where she moved to. Are we assuming that she found her own place? Maybe she did take up Cinda's offer and use that money to buy that new place. I'm very curious to know where she ended up moving, but we see that Mabel does put the pieces of the puzzle together about Greg. He wasn't there when Ben was pushed, so it makes sense that he's not the killer. As Topper arrives, did you all notice that he has all new gear and he has a title and logo for Mabel's new podcast, which he calls it the Bloody Mabel Podcast? Now, I've had my suspicions on him and I still think he's very high on my suspect list, but does it seem clear as day that he is more interested in launching his own thing and using Mabel to do so? As Theo shows them something interesting from what was believed to be the first drawing of Ben's idea of Cobra. Now this is a bit of a stretch, but they theorize that the signature that Ben left is actually an R, which they connect to Dickie, and Mabel remembers what Dickie told her about Ben taking his ideas. Now she's believing that Ben stole Dickie's idea for Cobra, and that's Dickie's motive for killing his younger brother. Now to take my little theory that I had a couple weeks ago with the number 3 and there's triplets, and there's this mystery twin brother out there, it might still be in play. What if that R is stand for something, and maybe that R is, we know that Dickie said that he was adopted, maybe Loretta had 2 boys, or maybe it was a girl and one of those twins are trying to save their younger older brother. I don't know. I'm still thinking that there's 3 people involved, but it is time for Mabel to record for the first time without the guys as we end the episode with Oliver firing Matthew and rehiring Charles as they apologize to each other and they're friends again, which is great, but they have to figure out how will they bring Mabel back into the crew. Oliver finally shows Charles the secret Loretta journal. He believes that this doesn't make her a killer, which Charles might be right, as they think that this could be used as a peace offering for Mabel. But it is too late as Mabel has officially moved out of her aunt's apartment, which by the way, are we gonna ever meet who her aunt was? But Oliver and Charles and everyone listens to the first new episode with Mabel flying solo for the new Only Murders in the Building season, hashtag Bloody Mabel, as it is time to reopen Ben's case. I also want to point out that Uma did say that earlier that she sold that hanky for $7,000, as we learned that it was Dickie that bought that hanky and he's crying over it. Now the question is, are those tears for grieving or because he killed his younger brother or he knows who did it? Or is it a combination of all those things? Now let's take a look at our updated suspect list after this episode. Right now, I'm just going to narrow it down to 2 people, that being Loretta and her potential son, Dickie. So again, the working theory is she gave him up to pursue her dreams, but always kept tabs on him throughout the years with that secret journal. But why did she kill Ben? Did she discover that Cobra was Dickie's idea and she confronted Ben about this and she threatened to share this information to the public? But then Ben threatened her by ending her career and he's gonna threaten to fire Dickie, so she retaliated by killing him? Or maybe she always knew about Cobra because that drawing was from Dickie when he was a kid and she knew that that was something important to him. And all these years later, for missing up on time on raising her son, she thinks by killing Ben, she's doing right by her son for him pursuing his dreams and making his dreams come true. But that still leaves the question, where does that leave Dickie? Is he aware of this whole Loretta maybe being his mom? Or, putting that mom theory aside, do you all really buy into the whole jealous brother finally having enough of Ben and him taking his ideas and never giving him credit that he deserved and he finally snapped? I don't think it's that easy. Then the final question I have for you all is, who was Ben on the phone with? Could it have been this mystery twin or other brother or sister out there? Could it be a mystery child that he had? Who was he on the phone with? Let me know your theories on that. Theater is all about choices. What you share, what you hide, the same story, even the same lines can be delivered a million times. Those choices change everything. We get more of Loretta's backstory, as she was known as the best actress in the Midwest in high school, that according to her father, but also a visiting director from New York who would agree with that sentiment and end up getting Loretta pregnant. As we see, she makes a choice to give up her one and only son, who we know of at least, Dickie, to chase her dreams. Now, we already knew that Loretta's career never really took off, but every few years, the family that took Dickie in would give her these updates. Now, one of the updates showed that the couple, who couldn't get pregnant by the way, finally had their miracle baby, and it was Ben. So now, Loretta's son Dickie, who is no longer alone, now has a little brother. And we also learned that Loretta's secret book was indeed a way for keeping tabs on Dickie throughout the years, as she believed that she would never see her son again, but one day her chance to see him came true after it was announced that Ben would be joining Oliver's play, and this was her opportunity to see her son again. As these last few months for Loretta have been a dream for her, but it's time to tell her son the truth, as she believes there's still time to make things right. As everyone prepares for their rehearsals, Loretta wants to talk to Dickie later and is excited to do so, but it is time to fight through any mistakes during this rehearsal. No distractions, as Mabel walks in and Oliver just completely throws the distractions out of the window because he wants to talk to her. Now, I want you all to remember the word of this episode. It is extremely important to remember, and that word is distraction. Now, clearly Oliver and Charles are upset with Mabel that she didn't record with them, as we learn that Mabel has been living with Theo during this time and her boyfriend is out doing a commercial shoot, but he lent her a GoPro for her to use in her investigation. As Mabel tells Oliver and Charles that her main suspect right now is Dickie, which Oliver approves of this because no one from his cast, as we see that there's still tension between Oliver and Mabel, but Charles is trying his best to amend this friendship and get the trio working together again. As word gets out and the text messages start to appear on everyone's phone that Greg has been released, but I have a quick question. I'm no specialist when it comes to crimes or anything of that nature, but wouldn't he still be locked up for kidnapping and attempting to kill Charles and Mabel? I guess maybe they said there was no hard feelings, but I would assume that the man would still be locked up for what he did. But the real question I have is, when all those messages were coming up on everyone's phone, but then the show decided to give us Cliff's phone and it showed a message from someone by the name of Kelsey. Now, we see that the message says that that creepy guy didn't kill Ben. Who is this character? Why did their name have to show up on Cliff's phone? Why didn't he get like an article like Charles did? I wonder if that's just a throwaway thing, if it's nothing to be looked into, or if that is a character we should be keeping an eye out for with only 2 episodes left. But in comes my favorite character, who, if I'm being honest, has been sorely missed this season, and it is the one and only Detective Williams, played by the incredible Divine Joy Rudolph. Now, I am a big fan of hers. I assume that the reason she's been absent this season is because she was making HBO's The Idol, and she's also doing some movies that are coming out later this year, but her charm, her charisma, her comedic timing, her personality, everything about this character has been missed for me, and her being in this episode just made it 10 times better. As Detective Williams was prepared to take everyone into questioning, but Oliver convinces her to conduct all her interrogations at the actual theater. But she does confirm that Ben was poisoned opening night and someone covered it up. More on that later. We see Donna pulls Oliver aside because she doesn't approve of Oliver allowing the critic Maxine to attend this rehearsal, which isn't normal, but Oliver wants to show that he's got something special and that his musical can sing. But 2 things I want to point out here. Number 1, there's a line mentioned by Cliff saying that he has nightmares about Maxine. And then number 2 is Donna has mentioned in this scene, as well as throughout this season, that she has lost so much money in trying to keep this production going. I have something I want to share with you all a little bit later about Miss Donna, so stay tuned for that. We see our crew has to find a way to get into these interrogations, and we find out that Charles and Oliver do make that happen, and we'll discuss that here in a bit. But meanwhile, Howard has found something huge that can help the case. Now, I pointed this out last week that shredding machine may have some type of evidence, and that's exactly what Howard wants to show Mabel. That night when he heard something, he realized that was the shredder that was being turned on, and someone must have been using it and hiding something without anyone noticing. Now, Howard tells Mabel that he's a master at putting words together, and he is determined to see what the big secret is that was hidden in that shredder. Now, as we'll later find out, that Charles was intentionally trying to distract Detective Williams when she was conducting her interrogations, and I normally get like a good smile. I get like a chuckle from this show. Like, I find the show to be funny, but I never have like laugh out loud moments with this show until this scene here. I haven't laughed so hard with the show in such a long time. It's the scene where we see Charles doing the absolute most to stay in the interrogation room with Detective Williams while she's trying to get him out, and she does this later in the episode with Oliver. This is a perfect example of why we miss Detective Williams. She's such a good character to kind of bounce off of, and she just has such great comedic timing. Let me know if I was the only one that was laughing so hard during this scene, and honestly throughout all of her moments throughout this episode. As I digress, we see Loretta confronts Oliver about taking her book. As Oliver's trust is now in question, he tells her that he doesn't think that she's the killer. Then he mentions that Mabel's working theory right now is that her son Dickie is the one that they think killed Ben. And then you immediately see that look of concern of a mother thinking, how can she protect her son, as we know that is a key line from the original play, but also a very key moment within this very episode. As Loretta wants to help her out, as she says, she wants to learn, more importantly, why Dickie is on top of her suspect list. We see Loretta's trying to distract Mabel with throwing out names like Bobo and KT and mention how the rest of this cast is very weird. It doesn't really work because we know Mabel's a good detective. Meanwhile, Charles time to rehearse his song, and we see William takes the bait and gets distracted. As Charles performs the song with such excellence, to everyone's surprise, we see Oliver sneaks off to plant that GoPro in Williams' interrogation room. See the police walking over to Dickie and wanting to talk to him a little bit later. You see Loretta again, that look of concern as she's trying to, you can see the wheels turning in her head how to figure out a way to protect her son. Howard and Mabel don't have any luck at first putting the pieces of the puzzle together, but we see that Mabel ends up finding an empty box of rat poison and gives Howard this motivation speech to convince him that he can do this, he can put the puzzle together as he manages to find a date, and this is their way to finding out who may or may not be hiding something, but also this is Howard's way to maybe find a guest spot on their podcast. As Oliver and Charles fill Mabel in on their plan that they have been doing, which was distract Detective Williams throughout this episode, they got all the major interrogations on tape, and for the first time, hopefully it's a permanent thing now, the trio is making their podcast again, and they have to get back to solving this murder. Now remember the key word of this episode, and I've been saying it throughout this breakdown. I believe we just got the biggest clue from our killer in this following scene. Now the scene shows Loretta going to the bathroom to collect her thoughts. Meanwhile, Donna's in the bathroom with her, and I don't think I'm mistaken by thinking that she was throwing up in the toilet, as she claims that the nerves have gotten the best of her, which I find to be very interesting. Why is she so nervous? Let's talk about that. She goes to tell Loretta about how she's taken a big swing with this show and how she's been trying to save it, doing it all for her son, Cliff. Now, initially, you can take her telling Loretta how mothers can't help but to look after their child and it never stops as a way of like Loretta, the character, taking this moment to realize, man, I have to do whatever it takes to protect my son and make sure that he doesn't be called the killer for killing his brother. But to me, this goes all the way back to the biggest hint about the plot of the original play, and that was a mother would be willing to do anything to protect her son, even if that means to kill someone to protect her son. This moment to me, I'm 99% sure that Donna has something to do with Ben's murder to protect her son. But the question at hand is, why? We'll be talking about that here in a second. Let's wrap up the episode as Maxine tells Oliver that she's been very impressed by what she's seen so far because it's Oliver. It's his vision. It's him. It's the true version of him, which puts a big smile on Oliver's face. And it's important to note, last time we saw Maxine, what happened to Oliver? His heart gave out. I don't think it's coincidence that she's there yet again. As Dickie has a moment with Loretta and tells her that on the night that he found out that Ben had initially died, he felt free, but he realized that he was trapped this whole time and he just was happy for a brief moment, but then obviously he found out his brother was back only to die again. But the key thing that he says is he couldn't take it anymore because he felt trapped with his brother. As Dickie hugs her and tells her that this has been the best part of his last few months, him saying that to me is almost too on the nose, like it's a distraction for us as the audience to think that Dickie might have had something to do with it. And we'll share my suspect list a little bit later, but I thought that was a little too on the nose at the moment. But Oliver, he has some words for Loretta as well. And he doesn't only just trust her, but he also loves her. This is a big moment for Oliver. Again, we have to remember, this isn't just him falling in love in 2 weeks. They've been working together closely for over a year. So he tells her how much he loves her. As she takes the stage, the police proceed to take Dickie in as Charles and Mabel manage to sneak into Loretta's belongings, and they read the letter and they know her secret. As Loretta stops her performance and makes a confession, she tells everyone in the theater that she was the one that killed Ben. She poisoned his shake, and when it didn't work, she pushed him and killed him. As they take her in, we see Oliver's watching all this happening after just telling her that he loved her. He can't wait to spend more time with her. As she's getting arrested, it happens again. Oliver's heart gives out. He falls on the floor, and like I said last week, maybe this will be the moment that will bring the trio back on the same page. Wow, I mean, come on, pulling at the heartstrings at the end of this episode, the funny moments with Detective Williams. This to me was by far my favorite episode of this season so far. But now let's get to the fun, juicy theory parts, which is sharing my updated suspect list. So, Dickie's saying that he was happy to learn that his brother died, only for him to come back to life, to only die again. That to me just looked to be a little bit too easy of him being a killer. But again, he's still on my suspect list. Loretta's confession at the end of the episode to me was just like improvised. Like she had to figure out a way to make sure her son is not the killer. I still think that she might have something to do with it, but right now, again, she's still on the list. But now I want to focus on two key suspects. Now, after the first episode and later in the season, I had mentioned the producers Donna and Cliff, and you can watch those previous videos to see my reasons why they were initially on my suspect list, but they haven't been in the show as much, so I haven't really been thinking about them as much until this very episode. So let's put the spotlight on Donna, who after this episode, it just seems as clear as day that she not only might have killed Ben, but at least at the bare minimum, she had something to do with it. Because look, we all know she's willing, as she says many times throughout this episode and throughout this season, she's willing to do anything to protect her son, who she inappropriately kisses every now and then, and God knows what else they do behind the scenes, but protecting Cliff, even if it means killing the star of his very first big show. Now the question is, why would she do that? Well, I think it's Maxine. I think Maxine is the reason, because if you all remember, this was going to destroy the show by having her review, which was gonna not be a glowing review about Ben's performance. And I believe Donna not only got word of this, but she might have gotten a hold of Maxine's actual review, and she got rid of it with using that shredder. And maybe when Ben fell on stage, everyone, what's the word of the day? Distracted. Everyone was distracted. She took that review, got rid of it, and proceeded to poison Ben, and we find out that it didn't work, obviously. But again, her thought process was, I killed the lead of the show for we can continue to go on, and we'll just recast him for this show can continue to have success for my son. Okay, so pulling it back a minute here, maybe she didn't kill Ben, which brings me to her son Cliff. As Loretta said, poison is more of a woman's method. Again, going back to Donna being the one that poisoned Ben, but it failed at doing so. And now that leaves Cliff's to taking matters to his own hand and finishing the job that his mom started. Or maybe, as we know what he did with Matthew Broderick, maybe he called in a favor and had someone do it for him. So let me know what you all think about the producers. Again, that scene in the bathroom didn't seem so pivotal. It just seemed like that was Donna confessing that she would do anything to protect her son, in doing so, killing the lead of the show. Let me know your thoughts on that. But again, something still feels off to me, because I don't want to give up my theory that there are 3 people involved, right? So right now we have Cliff, we have Donna, but who is that third person? I'm still kind of curious on that. When Mabel was 10 years old, she had her whole future planned out. She was married to Josh Hartnett, they had 2 kids, and she drove a Honda Odyssey. As she's having a dream about giving birth to triplets, which I think will be a huge clue for later in this breakdown is no other than Charles, Oliver, and their podcast. Now, Oliver seems to be doing okay after spending 5 days to rest in a hospital, and he's prepared to head home. Now, I'm going to stop right there because I know we only got 30-35 minutes with this wonderful crew every single week, but they could have played up the Oliver health scare, especially the way they ended last week's episode, but I digress. As the team looks over their murder board after Loretta's confession last week, as they have yet to watch the footage from the interrogations, they are preparing to record their latest podcast with Mabel in the lead. Has arrived. One of them is for Oliver and is from Donna, and you'll notice it's from the same cookie place that they all love, and it's the same one she gave Ben, as she's requesting a new leading lady, and the other is for Joy, as is her wedding dress that her mother wore. But no time to open up old wounds, it is time to prepare to talk to Dickie, as they use reverse psychology on Dickie by sharing why they believe he's the killer. For example, saying that Ben stole the Cobra idea, for him covering up Ben all the time, which actually leads Dickie to admitting that he did cover up Ben's blood work because he didn't want it to be public knowledge to be found what was actually in the system. But the question remains, where was Dickie when Ben was pushed? Now, Dickie claims he left the party early, he got dressed up in an old CoPro outfit, he got wasted looking for a good time, which he says was a common routine for his brother Ben, where every Thursday he would hang out with his 5 special women who he actually saved opening seats for. Now, these special women go by the name of Trixie, Marigold, Emerald, Dot, and May May. Now, Dickie whereabouts clear him for now, or is there another person that happens to look like Dickie? I'm telling y'all right now, I will never drop the triplets theory or 3 people at least in being involved in this murder. So the big question remains, who is the real killer, as they have till 5 o'clock to get enough evidence to prove that Loretta is innocent and to make her take back that she believes that she's guilty. As they arrive to Snitches Get Stitches, thinking it's a brothel, Charles fakes cries his way to the back room, where they learn it's actually a sewing circle that Ben intended to keep him away from street drugs. As we flash back to see Ben and his ladies making the hankies and going over his lines, the 5 special women play a voicemail that Ben left for them, as he tells them that he didn't trust any of the cast and crew around him. Who was this one person or multiple people that Ben didn't trust, and who was out to get him? As the besties take a moment to finally listen to the interrogations, and first up on the tape is KT, as she reveals that Ben was late to what they refer to as half hour, and she was upset by that, but not upset enough to kill Ben. Now we fast forward to what's going on Cliff's tape, which shows him delivering cookies to Ben, which happened to be purchased by his mother Donna, as they knew his weakness were sweets. Fast forward to what's going on with Dickie's tape, we see that him and Loretta were talking about him getting the courage to leave his brother Ben for all the terrible treatment he's done to him over the years, and we see that he was going to tell Ben that he was going to quit after the show. Now Ben kind of interrupts this conversation. He takes a letter that Dickie wrote of him quitting. We see the big old fight between the brothers where Ben disowned him as his brother. Now, Howard's interrogation just shows that he heard the shredder, and we know that he's still kind of working out the pieces to the puzzle. And then we get to Loretta's tape. Now, in Loretta's tape, they show finally the rehearsal between her and Ben, and we've only seen the tail end of that conversation, but now we know what happened. Now, Ben was upset because obviously he found out that it was Loretta that kind of pushed Dickie to quitting, and this caused tension between them, which led to Ben kind of getting a little too personal and hurting Loretta, which obviously we know that's where Charles came in and actually punched Ben. So the question remains, after Joy fixed that bruise, who was the next person to talk to Ben? As we see it playing out, that it was Donna. She didn't want to let her son fail. She was trying to motivate Ben to get in the right state of mind after all the stuff that he just previously went through. She wanted to make sure that the star was going to be on stage giving the best performance for her son can have an excellent first play. As we see that Talbot tried to do what he was paid for, but Ben wasn't having it. But they still don't know who was Ben talking to on that camera, as they don't know what they don't know. As they take a quick break and Mabel shares that it's actually her 30th birthday. Now this is where Howard arrives with the shredded paper, and if you seen my last video last week, but protecting Cliff, even if it means killing the star of his very first big show. Now the question is, why would she do that? Well, I think it's Maxine. I think Maxine is the reason, because if you all remember, this was going to destroy the show by having her review, which was gonna not be a glowing review about Ben's performance, and I believe Donna not only got word of this, but she might have gotten a hold of Maxine's actual actual review and she got rid of it with using that shredder, I seem to be 100% correct. The paper that was shredded was Maxine's review of the original show, which talked about how terrible Ben's performance was. Let's put that aside for a second and wish the incredible character played by Selena Gomez, Mabel, a happy birthday.
To you, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Mabel. Happy birthday to you. Flat, horrible, I know.
Thank you, guys.
Now back to the case. I wasn't the only one who was right about something, as Oliver talks dirty to the Dips and Mabel remembers Ben's weakness for sweets, and we learn that it was the cookies that Ben was talking to. He devours the cookie. He feels ashamed about himself, and this is where he wrote that he was a pig on the mirror. By the way, Paul Rudd was excellent in this episode. I really enjoyed how they played on the sympathy element of the character, and that pig moment was also very funny but also very kind of sad at the same time. I just thought that he was great in that scene. Now, my reasons for how Donna got the review was a little bit off, but Oliver puts it together that the cookie came from her and that she most likely somehow convinced someone from the paper to give her the review early because she wanted to protect her son. As we cut to seeing Donna shredding that review, and she put the rat poison on the cookie and she delivered the cookie to Ben's dressing room. As we end the episode with having our motive, we have the actual murder weapon, which is the cookie, but the actual pushing of Ben. That's the part to me that doesn't sit well. I don't believe that Donna was actually the one that pushed Ben. Maybe this is where her son comes in or someone else entirely. As they head to Loretta dressed for a wedding, as Mabel wished for her birthday so that she can spend this special day with her two best friends, and I love the movie reference line here as we have Charles and Oliver, the father of the bride. As they arrive to the courtroom to stop Loretta from saying that she's guilty, but she believes that she's just come too far to stop at this point, as they are about to tell her who they believe killed Ben, as the camera pans and we find out that who they believe is the killer, Donna, is in the courtroom as well. Let's take a look at my suspect list here. Now, I want y'all to remember it takes 2 to tango, but 3 to solve this murder, and I still believe that there are 3 people involved in this murder, but I don't know who that third person is quite yet. Again, right now, the working theory is that we have Donna, who got a hand on the review. She knew it would destroy her son's first play and possibly his last play by the review being so bad. She got it, she got rid of it, and she got rid of her lead at the same time, which fits perfectly for the central conflict of the Death Rattle screenplay. But again, I don't see Donna being the one who pushed Ben. Now again, I think this is where you can maybe insert Cliff in the situation, but it just seems too easy. The mother tries to kill the star, she feels at it, then her son comes to clean up and actually do it. Something's off, and by something's off, I'm talking about Dickie. In this episode, something was off about him, something was odd about him, but I just can't put my finger on it. I don't know if he is entirely involved, but I still have my thoughts that there may be another brother or another sister that just hasn't been revealed quite yet. Now, going back to something that has yet to be revealed, who was Ben on the phone with that night of the party that made him rush out of that party? I believe that maybe whoever he was on the phone with, they could have gotten into a fight, they pushed him and killed him, but who would have that hatred? Who is the character that we haven't really seen quite yet? That's where I think that it might be one more final twist. I hope this doesn't happen, but it was a big surprise that it was actually Ben that accidentally failed and killed himself. I hope that's not the reveal. I do have a feeling in my gut though that there is another twist coming, and I don't think it's as easy as Donna and Cliff. Again, I want to go back to the opening scene where Mabel was dreaming about having triplets. There has to be a missing sibling out there. Either Ben's biological parents had a mysterious kid, or Loretta, who gave up Dickie, maybe had another child that they just didn't reveal to us. I just have a theory, and I just can't shake it out of my bones that there are 3 people involved. Now, obviously, symbolizing the 3 being an important thing of the show, obviously they can point towards Mabel, Charles, and Oliver, the big 3. They work together well. Obviously, we saw that in the episode. It takes 2 to tango, but it takes 3 to solve the mystery. So I get that angle, but again, I just feel like season 1, there was 1 killer. Season 2, there were 2 killers. Season 3, it would just make perfect sense that there were 3 people involved in Ben Glenroy's death.
What is it that a producer does? They produce. As we get down a story of her giving birth to the most important project of her entire life, and it is her son, Cliff. As she made a promise on the day that he was born that she would always protect him for the rest of his life, no matter what.
Which we all remember that mothers willing to do whatever to protect their sons was a very critical plot for this season. Rhode is invited into the inner circle after the crew convinced her to not plead guilty and bailed her out of jail, but the question remains, is Donna the one that pushed Ben? It's not adding up because it seems very drastic of her to do that, as Loretta remembers Donna was throwing up in the restroom and puts it together that she is sick. And if she only had a limited amount of time left, she would do anything to protect her son's first play. As Loretta's on the roll, as she shows the crew the hanky that Dickie paid $7,000 for, which was on Ben the day that he died, which we later see them use to get Donna's confession. As it is opening night and nerves are high, as Howard is doing his getting in routine, and speaking of high, Jonathan takes the leading man cocktail, which later puts him out of commission. As the team plants the seeds to getting Donna alone, as Mabel gives her flowers with a note about a new review in KT's office, which they knew she would take the bait based on what she did before. But first, one on the lips and another on the heart, a very important moment of what happens a little bit later in this episode. As they have their cards in their hand and it's time to confront the killer, now instead of this drawn out battle of lies coming from Donna or this dramatic response that we get from someone a little bit later in this episode, he just flat out confesses. She did poison Ben, but she didn't intend to kill him, she just wanted to knock him on his ass because she wanted to buy them more time. The crew still needs to know, why did she push Ben, which we see her initially denying that she did this, but then they reveal that the hanky had her lipstick on it. Now, the crew obviously doesn't know this right now, but we have been speculating this for weeks, that Donna was definitely a part of this, as it is confirmed that she was the one that poisoned Ben, but not the one that pushed him, and that she was most likely covering for her son, but she tells them that she was the one that did it.
I did it. I killed Ben Glenroy.
As they point out, normally these take a little bit longer and it tends to be a little bit more confusing. As they celebrate and congratulate Mabel, she has a look on her face that she knows something's off about Donna's confession about killing Ben. As Donna proceeds to tell them that she will turn herself in and that she does have stage 4 cancer, and she requests that they hold off calling the police. That way she can see her son's first play, which they agree to do. As Howard comes rushing into the room with a very big problem, he tells Oliver that Jonathan's leading man cocktail has put him on ice and they have to find a replacement ASAP. Now, it's kind of led to believe that Howard was going to be the one to finally get his moment in the spotlight, but no, instead, it's the one and only Oliver who takes up the role and takes on the stage of the riskiest play of his career. As they perform Creatures of the Night, Mabel heads to the back where Talbot wants to take the next steps in their relationship, as he invites her to LA where he'll be working on an independent film. Now, immediately in my head, I was thinking, oh, this is the show's way of saying goodbye by sending one of their lead characters away, but as we'll discuss, we got a lot more crimes to solve with this show, as Mabel tells him that she'll think about it. Back on stage, Loretta performs as Dickie and Mabel watch. As Loretta heads off the stage, she is ready to tell Dickie the truth, but before she actually says that she's his mother, he stops her because he already knew this all the way back to when they had their first table read. Now, this obviously being a sentimental moment between mother and son, we see Mabel looks off at the audience as Loretta tells Dickie that there is nothing in the world she wouldn't do for him. Cut that between Donna telling her son something of the same thing, as this clearly upsets him as he runs off. As Mabel finds Cliff above the stage where Jerry stays, Cliff lets her know that he would normally hide up here when he would watch his mother's plays that she's produced, as Mabel knows it wasn't Donna who pushed and killed Ben, it was Cliff. Cut back to that night where Cliff and Ben talk about him learning that he had rat poison in his system. Ben starts to remember that it was Donna who gave him that poison, and he begins to tell Cliff that he's gonna have his mother pay for this and send her to jail. As they start throwing insults at each other, as Ben is being called a hack and a phony, and Ben is continuously calling Cliff the boy, they begin pushing one another. As we cut between this confession and Loretta back on stage, Cliff admits that it was an accident, which let's go ahead and address this now. Yes, it was definitely an accident, but I still consider Cliff to be the killer. The fact that he allowed 2 other people to take the blame and he never confessed during that time that he could have told the police that it was him, definitely in my eyes wouldn't get him off of any less of a serving time. He threatens Mabel that he's going to fall to his death and begins to feel bad. He knew that this was supposed to be Ben's opening night and Ben's moment to shine on stage, and he actually starts to see Ben on stage, which was obviously in his head, but I think this was a show maybe hinting at that he might have had some type of feelings of remorse. We cut back to seeing the actual moment where Cliff pushed Ben to his death, and it is confirmed that the killing wasn't planned. Things just kind of got out of hand, but nevertheless, Ben died at the hands of Cliff. As Cliff wants them to tell his mother that he's sorry and that he loves her, and he begins to let himself go as his mom comes to save her son one last time. Now, the audience has no clue what's going on. We even have an appearance from Matthew Broderick, who's happy that he was fired from the play, as it is curtain time and the team does their fist pump to each other, and they actually take the killers on stage with them, which was a bit odd and a little bit strange, but the honest truth is, without them, the show wouldn't have made it this far, even though Ben had to die to get to this point. As the police take the mother and son into custody, two questions I have for you all in the comments. Do you think that she told her son that she actually did have cancer, and will that actually affect her maybe getting less jail time because she's had stage 4 cancer? But also, do you believe Cliff had remorse in killing Ben? And if so, would it be like a similar situation to Theo, who we know back in season 1, all he got was house arrest for accidentally killing that girl back in season 1, and he kept that secret for years, which to come to think about it, that's so crazy. But anyway, can we see that being a similar treatment to what Cliff did? It was an accident. Maybe he'll get less time. Or maybe he'll end up on house arrest like Theo. As we end the episode with Oliver reading Maxine's review, and as it turns out, even though all the craziness and the death surrounding this play, she gave them a positive review. As Loretta and Oliver are back at the piano, and they thank each other for never giving up on one another, as Dickie lets Loretta know that there are 2 offers waiting for her in LA. Now obviously this is the moment she's been waiting for her whole career, but she's not sure if she wants to take it because that would mean she would have to leave Oliver. But he encourages her to go, and it's kind of implied that he's going to probably occasionally pay visits to her while she's out in LA. Meanwhile, will Mabel be on a flight to LA? As she tells Talbot the same thing, basically, that she's going to stay in New York City and she's going to unstick herself, but she'll be willing to pay him a visit every now and then. As Zaz arrives with beers to celebrate, she makes a joke.
Who knows? Have I made copies of all your keys? Like I said, who knows?
Which I don't think was a joke. More on that later, as she tells Charles that she's got something sensitive and important to tell him.
I got something I need to talk to you about when you get a sec, huh? It's a little sensitive.
Let's circle that for a second. As Charles is headed to his apartment to get more drinks to celebrate, he gets a non-romantic text from Joy about Scott Bakula. Cut to seeing Charles in his apartment, and bang, a shot comes through the glass and it hits him in the chest. Now we're led to believe that Charles is dead. I want you all to take a quick look at this clip from my breakdown of episode 6. But Mabel dismisses that and she won't allow it, and boom, out of nowhere, 2 sandbags fall and almost kills Charles. Which this show is telling us that something bad might be happening to our Charles, guys, because go back to last season when they had to fake his death in the finale. You think about the last episode, Zaz telling him that some people wish that he died instead of for Ben. I know Oliver's the one with the heart issue right now, but what if they're setting up that Charles might not make it to the end of this season? As you all can see, they have been hinting at this very moment for a little bit now, as we cut to them wondering what's taking Charles so long, as it is revealed that it wasn't Charles, but it was Zaz who was upstairs and has been shot in the chest. You see Zaz is bleeding out, and she uses the blood on her fingers to maybe write out an important thing that she wanted to tell Charles, or maybe she already knew who this was and she was telling him who it was. And I think what she was writing was a particular letter that we'll talk about here in a second, as we end this 3rd and final season of what? But wait, hold on 1 second. As Charles isn't the only one to celebrate today, we have to celebrate, ladies and gentlemen, because Only Murders in the Building has officially been greenlit for season 4. First, let's get into my thoughts on the finale, the season overall, and then wrapping up with my predictions of season 4. Now I'm gonna get straight to my thoughts on the finale. Now, I love the show, obviously, hence I've covered every episode since the very beginning, but in my humble opinion, every finale has been underwhelming when it comes to the big reveal. Now, you can watch my previous breakdowns on the finale, and yes, I've gotten most of the reveals like 90% right, which isn't my issue with these finales. My issue is I feel like the execution of the big moments just feels so underwhelming. I'm even thinking about the Dickie and Loretta moment, where to me it didn't have the emotional punch I was hoping for. So as far as my just general opinion and thoughts and review of the finale, it's on par with the previous 2, which in my eyes have just been okay finales. Now, season overall, I'm going to get this out of the way. All the performances across the board were great. Now, focusing on the characters, I felt the development of Oliver was the best out of all the main characters this season. He definitely got the chance to have a successful play while falling in love, while almost dying in the process. And all of the Oliver stuff just really was solid to me, even though I will admit the heart scare was a little bit of a plot device versus like an actual scare. Now, that leads us to Charles, who him finding love but ultimately messing it up kind of lines up with Charles, but him overcoming his anxieties and overcoming his insecurities and nailing that song was a pretty solid arc for this character this season. Now, I'm a big Mabel fan, but to me, she got the short end of the stick this season. She started and ended the season in the same place. She still has no place to call home, nor does she know who she wants to be. Now, of course, she doesn't have to know that stuff, but it seemed like the show was setting it up, but they really didn't have a payoff. The whole Cinda moment to her leading to hosting one episode of the show, and again, big fan of the character, love the actress Selena Gomez, but the writing and the story for the character to me was very lacking. The new characters were a huge improvement from last season. Loretta being played by the incredible Meryl Streep, and of course Ben being played by Paul Rudd. They were excellent in their roles, and I thought that they were just great additions, especially when you look at the new additions from last season. But Talbert, let's talk about him. I like the actor, but to me, besides maybe Oscar, all of Mabel's love interests have been just red herrings and have somewhat affected Mabel's arc in a negative way in my eyes. So I kind of felt like, I won't say that he was pointless, because as I'll get into now, I do find it interesting that if we do see Talbert and Loretta back in LA, maybe this is a way to have our characters playing in like a new sandbox, and we can see those characters kind of going between Los Angeles and New York. That would be a pretty cool twist. Let me know what you all think about that. And I'll wrap up my final thoughts of this season with saying it hurt my heart that Detective Williams wasn't more in the show, and I hope that she is more involved come next season. But overall, the chemistry between Mabel, Charles, and Oliver remained to be undefeated. Paul Rudd and Meryl Streep were great new additions. There were a lot of funny, memorable moments, and I will say, the musical aspect this season was flat out phenomenal. The production, the songs, and of course the story being so important to this season, which leads me to my overall ranking. I gotta say, season 1 is still my favorite season. Then I will put season 3 as my number 2,
And then coming in last place would be season 2.
so go ahead and share your thoughts of the season as a whole, what worked, what didn't work, your thoughts on the finale, and also share your rankings in the comments below. So let's get to the big thing of this finale, which is who killed Zaz. Now, I could be wrong, but was she trying to write out the letter J with her blood on the floor? But let's take it back and let's focus on episodes 5 and 6 of the season. If you all recall, Zaz told Charles that people wish that he died instead of for Ben. Follow that with episode 6 when we saw almost 3 sandbags almost kill Charles. Of course, we can say the sandbags were Jerry because he was doing that whole the theater is haunted thing, but also remember that Charles was stuck and almost died in the closet in episode 6 as well. Now, eventually he made his way out of the closet, and of course we can say that's all a coincidence, but we can also say maybe that was the killer playing with Charles. But I don't think so. I think it was all leading to this very moment where Zaz was shot instead of for Charles. But the question remains, who would want to kill him? Now, I'll be the first one to admit, I love this team. I think they're great, but I am a product of the Game of Thrones method, which is killing their main characters. I personally believe that if they would have killed Charles, that would have been a huge thing for the show leading into season 4, and we don't know if season 4 is the last one or if season 5 is the last one. Who knows at this point? But let's just say this. If they would have killed Charles leading to season 4, that would have been a great way of Mabel and Oliver trying to figure out who killed their best friend. That would have been so interesting to me, but obviously that didn't happen. But that doesn't mean that come the end of season 4, they kill one of the main characters, and that could be an entry into a season 5. But let me know if you guys think they should have killed Charles, or are you okay with the end result? Now, getting back to the whole question, who would want to kill the wonderful Charles? Well, I would like to remind you all, he has a lot of beef with people. We saw this just this season alone, that Charles had beef with Ben, dating back to when he was a kid and got Ben fired, to even the conversation with him and Matthew Broderick. So it's not hard to imagine that someone would want him dead. Now, obviously going back to my whole maybe Zaz was writing out the letter J, let's talk about those J's, and I'm referring to Jan and Joy. Which I'll just say, I don't think it was neither one of them, but let's just kind of play with that card, and let's start off with Jan. Now, we know that her and Zaz were in a relationship. We don't know the details of that relationship, but we do know Jan was in jail, so I don't think she would be able to shoot him from her prison cell. So let's talk about Joy here. While Charles did suspect his fiance to be the killer at one point, which was proven to be wrong, I don't think that would make her want to kill her ex-fiance. But again, I want to point out something. How many times have we heard the name Scott Bakula? Well, I would like to remind you all, we've heard it quite a few times, not only this season, but this dates back all the way to season 1. Those that don't know, Scott Bakula is a well-known actor. He's still very active in the acting game, and I would love to see him quantum leap into the new season. You see what I did there, quantum. Anyway, I would love to see him be a part of the show, especially considering that I think that they will be in Los Angeles as a new location, and who's to say that Scott Bakula or any other big celebrities can make a cameo, and I think that would be kind of nice and interesting and kind of a new kind of flavor to the show if we go to a location, and also meeting Scott Bakula, who seems to be a big rivalry for our character Charles. But then there's the big obvious thing, maybe it was Zaz that was meant to be killed and not Charles. Again, her telling him she's got something sensitive to tell him. We know Charles normally is the one to bail people out with money, as we saw in this finale with him bailing out Loretta. So it wouldn't be hard to make up the scenario where maybe in the past Charles has helped out Zaz financially and got her out of trouble, and maybe he agreed to doing this again, and that's why Zaz was going upstairs to celebrate, like, thank you Charles for helping me whatever this situation is, but unfortunately it was too late and it ended up getting her killed. So there you have it. Those are my thoughts on the finale, the season, and my thoughts on the season 4, which to address that as far as when can we expect to see season 4. Now this show is known to have a pretty quick turnaround, like there's less than a year between seasons 1, 2, and 3, but of course we know this time around there was a writer's strike, there's an actor's strike. Now obviously as I'm recording this, the writer's strike has been resolved, but we're still waiting on the actors to get what they need and get what they deserve. So if I were to guess, if let's just say they have this resolved, I'm referring to the actors strike going on, let's say this is resolved within the next couple weeks, I don't think that they will be able to get things in production and have season 4 out by next year. But I could be wrong, because I would imagine, because they have this history of a quick turnaround, maybe they were already writing season 4 right before season 3 came out, and all they have to do is kind of do touch-ups, and then once the actors are ready to go, maybe they can get them ready and have this show out by 2024. But again, no pressure. I don't want them to rush this, but I would assume, to be on the safe side, we could maybe expect to see season 4 early 2025. Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. But before we wrap up this video, I want to take the time to thank every one of you all that have been here since maybe the very beginning, my very first breakdown of episode 1 of season 1 of this show, or maybe you're watching this for the first time. There are just so many incredible content creators that have covered this show every single week like I have done, and do a great job at doing so. But the fact that you all come to my reviews and support these reviews means the world to me. So again, thank you, thank you, thank you. If you're still here, put in the comments right now, hashtag COM, hashtag COM, which stands for Charles, Oliver, and Mabel. As you all can see on the screen now, consider liking this video, leaving your thoughts in the comments, share this video to anyone and everyone you know that loves talking about the show just as much as we do. And if you're interested, consider subscribing to the channel, checking out my latest reviews. You all are amazing, stay safe, and I'll catch you all on the next video.